what would you say is the one thing that execs are currently missing when it comes to their cyber health?
I think for us, our experience has shown us that like most people don't know where to start. I think it can be a very overwhelming conversation. I think most people would acknowledge there's improvement to be made, but I think you kind of have this like get off zero problem. Um, and I think people are a little bit overwhelmed by just the sheer magnitude of like the surface area of the problem. And I think for us, I think that that was really kind of like where we wanted to start was how do we make it approachable? How do we make it like easy for people just to like get going?
Nice. And how would you equate, I guess, cybersecurity to healthcare, right? Because that's kind of your whole area.
Yeah. Yeah. I think traditionally the marketing tone that has worked really well with security products at large is a combination of fear and information asymmetry. Like by that, I mean your traditional TV ads that might say, there's a hack every 30 seconds and you can be next unless you pay us $8 a month for, whatever monitoring. And I think like that uh, formula has worked for a really long time for a certain percentage of the population. I think in our experience, we found that the vast majority of people do not spend in the category and kind of take product security, think iPhone or Uber or American Express as like they do their job and I'm good just because they spend. Um, but I think the more mature audience, right, certainly the more technical folks that we speak to who have an awareness that, those companies that sell in that way are a little bit hollow, are looking for a more mature conversation, are looking for a more mature solution that's going to treat them like an adult and say, hey, if you don't work with us, you are not going to be compromised tomorrow. But as a smart person who is aware of like the risks that are changing, we agree that it's advisable to get support on sort of taking those first steps to minimize risk. I think in that way, it's a lot like healthcare. It is not that if you don't work with this longevity doctor or go to the trainer or see that specialist that you're going to experience an acute pain tomorrow. But I do think it's about making sensible choices and understanding the trade-offs that are actually achievable by the individual to make great security and privacy adjusted decisions. I think in that way, it's a lot like the sort of proactive healthcare conversation that's happening right now in our country. And for us, we think it's a much more mature way to approach the problem for the vast majority of people who are not currently spending in the space.
Mike, I'm curious, what are your thoughts there?
No, I mean that's kind of our take when we talk about cybersecurity with folks. Is we don't want to fear monger, right? That's the thing in its own right, but that's not the answer to the problem. The answer to the problem is usually probably a lot of what you talk to your customers, a lot of small things that add up, kind of like healthcare, right? Just because they're eating cheeseburgers at
Correct.
a grocery store every day, you're not going to have a heart attack tomorrow or the next week or the next year, but it adds up, and it
Correct.
is what it is. Yeah, yeah, it makes sense.
The incentives, right, like are also related. Like McDonald's and Marlboro, right? Like they employ doctors for a very long time to tell you that their products are healthy and safe to eat every day. And if you talk to them, they will justify it. But at the end of the day, like I think most people realize that the authority that's going to give them the best advice for themselves is not someone who's incentivized to sell more of that product. Um, for us, we think that's I think very foundational. Is like you want an advocate, right? You want someone who thinks about AJ or Mike, like what is good for that person, not what is good for the product. And again, as our most important assets increasingly digitize, like we think that sort of the current equilibrium is very, very unsustainable. And there'll be a lot of different solutions at very, very different price points for people to get like a direct model. But again, I think for us, like it's very, very clear that people do need help in this regard, and it's actually quite hard to come by.
Do you find yourself having to do a lot of education with clients, or are they already coming in pretty educated and you're just kind of helping them along a little bit further?
Yeah, I mean, it's like there is like a marketing adage that you should like preach to the already converted. So I think it's always easy when we are talking to people who don't have to be convinced that like the doing nothing is okay. Um, That said, there are of course your privacy or security skeptics that are not sold on the fact that they should be doing something, or what they have today, the status quo, is not good enough. Um, I would say in that sense, like, we take it as somewhat of an honor to educate people in this category to, again, without fear, in a mature and honest way, say, here are the risks, here's what's happening. Um, and there are some sensible frictions you can endure in your day-to-day life to make sure those things are extremely unlikely.
What are, what are your typical customers?
Today, we work mostly with higher risk individuals. So these are either executives at large companies, certainly public companies have a particular interest in our work, but also we work with high net worth individuals that just quite frankly have a lot to lose and are therefore like very rational targets for attackers. I think in the corporate example, like, we really think about the CISO as like our key champion, where they are probably very technical and able to protect themselves in a pretty reasonable way, but they're like some ways constrained at how much they can do for their executive team on the personal side. And then typically on the high net worth side, like, people have an appreciation that cyber is an increasing risk. These are people who are either running companies themselves or in boardrooms, and they're hearing sort of more and more about their companies and businesses they're affiliated with that are doing more. And they're asking themselves the question, like, why am I immune from this? Why am I not doing more? Um, and so I think for us, like, those are probably the people that are most interesting for us to be working with. I think the other reason why we chose this category to start with is because they're facing the most advanced threats first, right? Like, before a threat can become economical to deliver and like call it the mass market, it's typically tested at like a higher net worth level. And so for us, there's an advantage as far as like, okay, where does the market clear today from a demand perspective, but also we want to be looking at the threats that like are going to be facing hundreds of millions of people tomorrow, and like this population is like fairly ideal for that.
I have a question to go down
Yeah.
into this a little bit. So, do you take into account their family members as well? And I ask that because we used to, when I did pen testing back in the day, at a big company, we did what's called a PIP, so public information profiling. And we found that a lot of the information we got was actually from their spouse or their kids and stuff like that. So, are they taken into consideration as
Yeah.
well as part of this?
Yeah. The short answer is absolutely. Similar to a new doctor, there are two inputs into an initial assessment for how we perform like a threat modeling exercise of an individual. The first is a questionnaire, so they'll voluntarily answer security and privacy questions that help us understand where they're at. And these could be things like, how do you come up with a new password, or do you have a guest Wi-Fi network at home? But your question really concerns the second input, which is we conduct an open source intelligence investigation on each executive or each individual member that we work with. That definitely includes all available open source material, which includes social media family members. We will often see a wide variety of attitudes towards the voluntary upload of content online, from young people, old people, and in between. And it's not to say that young people are worse or old people are worse or people in the middle are the worst. I have seen at every age people have irresponsible or more sort of open attitudes towards publishing information about themselves online. In fact, we do ask the question during our intake, are you trying to promote yourself online in order to increase your followers? And today we probably get about 11 or 12% of our respondents say I am. But for most people that we work with, they are actually trying to not just increase security, but also increase privacy. As far as the remediation work going forward, we of course allow our members to include family members, executive assistants, chiefs of staff, anybody who's in your trusted circle who has privileged access is a totally viable target in order to get to the ultimate executive. So the short answer is, in an assessment, absolutely it's included. As far as the remediation work, right, like how we work with them on an ongoing basis, it's really up to them over how deep they want it. We certainly recommend it. And I would say we work with people of all ages.
I think that's really important that you include EAs or executive assistants and family, because that's something that I didn't even think of. But, there's some individuals will give essentially their entire life over to
Right.
their EA, and they might not be as well versed in security. So that's probably an area that is very fruitful for attackers.
Yeah. I mean, I would say for our audience, it's more common than not that there is someone who they are outsourcing or delegating to a very consistent amount of their work. I'll also add that I think these people who are support, by and large, want to help. Like, they want to be helpful in this regard. But there is also like a practical kind of uh, implication where, for example, if you're throwing multi-factor on things with no regard for that there might be multiple people that need to access that account, like you're just encouraging people to like step outside the compliance of like whatever you're investing in. So I think for us, like part of it on the OSINT side is how do we simulate what a type of prospecting exercise an attacker would do to find the most economical way to compromise the target. But sort of on the back end of that, it's like, well, if you're creating a system that is not going to have buy-in, then they're just going to abandon it. So it's not practical. Um, and I think again that takes a lot of different unexpected payment sizes for different people. And I think for us, one of the benefits of being sort of the audience we are is that we can accommodate those types of like custom like additions.